God's greater honor and glory. Amen. Please be seated. There's an old song, and the beginning lyrics are, "Fools rush in where angels fear to tread." That's pretty much how I feel about preaching this gospel. I'm certainly no angel, but I'm no fool either. This gospel has a tendency to make people's blood boil. It just does. There's Martha in the kitchen trying to get dinner ready for her guest, and there's her younger sister, I'm assuming a younger sister, Mary, who's sitting listening to what Jesus is saying. Presumably, their brother Lazarus is right there. He fresh from the grave, having been dead for 4 days. So you can understand how Mary is just a little bit distracted by all of that. I mean, the kitchen was the last thing that she was concerned about because, I mean, after all, she was listening to what Jesus was saying, the same Jesus who before had raised her dead brother out of the grave. So Mary was a little impressed, you could say, with what Jesus had done and with what he was saying. And the last thing on Mary's mind is, gee, I better get out there and help Martha by peeling some potatoes. Not that they had potatoes in those days, but it doesn't matter. This is not a story of either or. This is not a story about either you pray or you peel potatoes. This is really a story of both and. That Mary could recognize the beauty of sitting at the Lord's feet. But then I'd like to think that after Martha's little, shall we say, request of Jesus, Jesus probably was sensitive to her if he wanted to eat and said, you know, we better go out there, Mary, and help your sister. I'd like to think that that's what happened after Mary's little request. There's no indication that Mary did that, but I'd like to think that Jesus was sensitive enough to what Martha was saying that he felt somewhat obligated. I mean, after all, there he is, the guest, putting all of this burden on Mary and Martha, and Mary's not doing much heavy lifting at all. Martha's doing all the heavy lifting. So this story is really a story about how we can pay attention to God and yet pay attention to the things that are temporal needs that are all around us. I mean, after all, dinner isn't going to make itself. Somebody has to get out in the kitchen and make dinner. That was Martha's calling. It was also, I would like to think, Jesus' intention to help Martha by asking Mary, come on, let's all go out and help her. She needs help. Let's be sensitive to that. So it's really a question of both and, I think, not a question of either or. Either you pray or you get out in the kitchen and rattle some pots and pans. It's not that at all. It's really a question of both and. That Jesus is sensitive enough and aware that he creates quite a stir wherever he goes, that's true, but that he also understands that there are little things that need to be tended to if life is going to go along smoothly and peacefully and tranquilly. And so he says to Mary, enough talk. We can talk in the kitchen helping your sister. Let's go. And off the two of them go into the kitchen. I'd like to think that that's how this story ends. It's really a question of prioritizing what we think we need in life. It's really a question not so much of do I do this or do I do that, but how can I do both? How can I pray? And then how can I turn my work into a prayer? How can I make each pot that I scrub a prayer? Sounds kind of silly, but I mean, after all, Christians in later centuries discovered that very thing. Saint Benedict founded an entire religious order of monks whose idea was to pray and to work. Not either or, but both and. And so that's what I think the gospel is trying to teach us today, that we can be very positive Christians, steeped in prayer, and also be involved with the work that needs to be done in order to make a household run smoothly. So as we continue to celebrate the Lord's body and blood, let's ask God to give us the perseverance and the insight. I think we need insight here in terms of understanding what God is calling us to do. I mean, if God is calling us to scrub pots and pans, maybe that's God's way of saying, this is how I want you to pray. Not only will you be praying, but you will also be contributing to the smooth running of the household. I think that's what the motivation of this gospel is, just that we are called to be prayerful people, but we're also called to be people who need to understand that when there is work to be done, we need to roll up our sleeves and work. Let's ask the Lord to give us insight into today's gospel. Amen. May God be praised.